Today, interviewing Vicki Condon on May 30th, 2007. So, Mrs. Condon, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing today?
Well, right now I am a production assistant for Transnation, Land America Transnation, where realtors, mortgage companies call in and ask for policies, ask for title work, or ask for the last deed on the property. Then I check the records that we have and get a copy of the deed, show that any mortgages are on there, and pretty much answer questions, help with policies, very detailed.
So, when you were a little girl, what was your life like?
I grew up on a small farm. We produced food for ourselves. My father worked in the factory, came home, did the milking, we raised pigs, we had sheep, a huge garden. My mother canned a lot, and I helped gather eggs. I helped bring the cows up for milking, and later on I milked and fed the animals and went to school. And I went to a little country school just a half-mile away and for a couple of years, a one-room school.
What kind of things did you do? Were you a large part in the role of the farm family?
Well, there were four of us girls, and I was pretty much the tomboy. My older sister stayed in the house, and my two younger sisters were too young to, do a whole lot on the farm, but I helped. My sister would drive the tractor during haying season, and I was in the back because we didn't bale initially. We just put the loose hay, and then we got to pack it down the barn, which was the best. Every kid on a farm loves to jump down on the hay from up above. So first time out, you're scared to death, but you make that first jump, and it's kind of fun.
That's cool. Did you have any struggles with your family, or did your family share any struggles of the day?
My parents worked hard to get any place, and we lived paycheck to paycheck. We didn't have a lot, but we had plenty of food. We had fresh milk, we had homemade butter, homemade bread, and all the canned foods in the wintertime, and so we were rich. We had no money, but we were rich.
Right. What was the hardest thing about your childhood growing up?
Being so far away from town, because my father worked in. There's like 2.5 miles to town, so unless we walked, then we couldn't. There's a lot of things at school that we couldn't participate in because we didn't have the gas or the time or the money to, drive into town.
What did you do? What did you like to do during high school when you were kind of older and started to get new jobs and start exploring more opportunities?
Between my junior and senior year, I worked at Amway, and I worked at Amway until I joined the Navy. That was a summer job for me, and it was. I worked at A&W Root Beer outside of town, and I was really excited because I made 10 cents an hour. The root beer was 10 cents. I made 50 cents, 70 cents. In the second year I worked, I made 75 cents. And then third year that I worked there, I made 90 cents, but I worked in the kitchen where it was hot. It was more fun outside with the customers.
What made you decide to go into the Navy?
I liked the idea of military. I didn't want to work in a factory like my parents did. It was a struggle for them to make ends meet. With four of us girls, I wanted something more in life. I wanted to go to college. We couldn't afford college. I was able to go on the Vietnam GI Bill because I went in during Vietnam and served my 3 years active duty during that time. But I didn't want to. I wanted to get away from a small town atmosphere, and I did. But I came back because I love Lowell. I mean, it's a great little town. It's improved a lot culturally, socially, and I like the small town atmosphere as an adult. As a kid, nobody likes it. That's just a fact of life.
Before you went into the military, did you have any dreams of becoming a certain profession at all?
Oh yeah, I had taken 3 years of French in high school, and I wanted to be a United Nations interpreter. That was my goal in high school.
Did you think that joining the military could help you achieve that dream at all?
No, because by that time I had already been married and divorced. And there were other things. I wanted my college degree. I wanted to teach.
So, what kind of things did you do after you went into the Navy?
As far as employment, or
Well, when you joined up, what was the first thing that you did?
I jumped off a bunk bed and hit the floor on my face because we had gotten, we flew in our first day of boot camp. We flew into Bainbridge, Maryland, and we got in there late. And there's an open bed here, an open bed there, an open bed there, and they put us all, go to bed. We'll get you squared away tomorrow. And I woke up at 5 o'clock when the bells were ringing. Young women were running all over the place trying to get squared away. And they said, well, you got to hurry up and get out of bed because we got to get going. So I jumped out of the bunk bed, but I was on the top row and fell right on my face. That was my first experience of boot camp. Get up and get going.
What was that like for you?
I was a scared little girl. I was a little country girl. I was very intimidated. Anybody that was in uniform that wasn't one of my peers, I was scared to death. I later learned to differentiate between officer and non-commissioned officer, but right at that first couple of weeks, it was I was very timid and had to learn to obey orders, then not think about it. Discipline was very strong, but we were ladies. We had to become ladies, and we were also to become square corners. You will be a square corner. We had to learn to do those bunk beds, and that was our CC, our company commander's motto. You will be a lady, and you will be a square corner. So I can still make a square corner.
So, what kind of things did you learn at boot camp?
Boot camp. I was at Bainbridge, Maryland, which we were the next to the last company of women to go through. We did a lot of marching. We learned, the history classes of the Navy and ships and planes and the whole criteria of the military role. But we didn't work with any ammunition, any guns. We were ladies, and it wasn't until the boot camp closed down in Maryland and they went down to Orlando, Florida, where the women would use guns and learn how to shoot firearms and break them down, clean them, and put them back together again. But the training that we had at Naval NTC Bainbridge was we were ladies. Things changed. And are still changing. At the time that I was on active duty, women were not allowed to have dependents. Women were not allowed to be on ships. It was later, as I had gotten out of the Navy, that women were first going to the hospital ships, refrigerator tankers, that type, where they were supply type ships that would go out to the fleet. And now women are on all the ships and are in combat. But in the 70s, when I was on active duty, that was not a choice.
Did you have any idea on what you were going to do after you joined the military, after boot camp?
Well, they had all the testing. You test before you go into the military. Number one, to make sure that you're smart enough. The Army has basic training tests. And then there was another battery of tests that we took. We were always taking tests. And then they had them geared towards your field of operation. What best suited you? And for me, it was a clerical type position, which was the radioman, and we learned how to use the older equipment. Now, everything's done on computers. But back then, we had ship-to-shore, ship-to-ship, voice communications, and now we have satellite. So.
Were you excited at all to go into your new job?
Yeah, I worked a regular shift. I worked 40 hours or 36 hours, depending on my schedule. We worked 3 shifts in 1 week, and it rotated. So if I went on Monday, I got off Friday morning, and I didn't go back again till Tuesday. And then Tuesday I'd work till Saturday, and Wednesday through Sunday. So it was always variable. But basically, I went in, we logged in our messages, and I worked for the Naval Investigative Service under Naval Intelligence Command, and we had all of our agents who our messages would come in. Subject matter would determine what branch, what office it went to. We logged them in, put them in a folder, and delivered them to the lieutenants, or officers, or agents, or whoever was in charge for that department. And we had our security clearances. There were things that came in that we rushed right down to the captain's office and turned around and left, because once we handed it off, we didn't want to know what else was happening.
Were you involved in any large operations or missions?
The final thing that I was involved with was Operation Homecoming. When Vietnam War officially ended to the public, we were involved in bringing the men and women back to the United States. And so we had all the messages of, who was coming from where, and we ended, who was MIA, missing in action, and who ended up being a POW, prisoner of war. We received a letter of commendation for that. We didn't get a unit citation, which would have been another medal, but we did get the letter, which helped for advancement later on down the road.
Was your job very stressful, and were you really nervous about going in your job every day?
The thing that I really wasn't nervous, but I know that some of the stuff came in that I couldn't write home to mom and dad about because there were things happening around the world. I went back to the same office as a civilian worker when I got out of the Navy, and was there during the Iran crisis. That was when Reagan was ending his presidency. I can't even remember the entire situation. I know that things happened fast. That's pretty much it.
What kind of things did you earn while you were on active duty?
Well, I had, as far as ribbons and awards, okay, right out of boot camp, because I was in during the Vietnam era, we received what we all considered the Guido Medal, which is this one right here. You got it just because you were in the military at that time. And then I was also in the reserves during the Iraq confrontation, so I have my Bronze Star. This ribbon right here is 4 years of reserve meritorious, and I had 17 reserves, so I've got 1 plus 3 stars, so this accounts for 16 years. This is 10 years for the Navy Reserve, and this one right here is for, I believe that's my Navy Achievement Award. And then I also have a ribbon that I got when I was in Washington, D.C. for the dedication ceremony for the Women's Military Memorial.
What kind of conflicts would you face normally at your job?
Getting a paper cut. Conflicts. I mean, there are things that I couldn't talk about. But as far as I was in an office building on the 10th floor. So there's we were in Alexandria, Virginia most of the time. So it wasn't any place where I could get harmed. I mean, I was in a safe office building, and I went to work. I had to sometimes go over to the Pentagon. We took the subway. That was scary sometimes, taking the subway. You would get nervous if a top secret message came in because you had a certain length of time that you had to get it processed and get it down to the person who it was addressed to. So that you could get a little nervous and stuff, but other than that, it was lots of paperwork.
How would you process the messages you sent and received?
We had a big, and I couldn't even tell you, it was a paper tape reader, basically. We had rolls of yellow tape that had holes in them, and each line of holes represented a letter, and we typed our messages and put it in we typed our messages on a special machine that printed out the holes for the tape, and we would have big rolls of paper tape that we'd use and send out the messages. And then we'd wind it up and hang it on a hook until we knew that they had processed it. Our messages were read into a system, and then they went to another central service where they were disseminated to around the world, basically. And the messages would come back in, from around the world through the central system, then come into our office. And it was all set up. But now everything's done on computers. You put who it's to and your carbon, you copy to. Just type everything out on computers now.
How did your military life affect your family life and personal life?
When I first went in, I was a little country girl, and I seen the world. I have a very open mind. I feel I'm a whole lot smarter, and I didn't end up working in a factory my whole life. I've done other things. I've gone to college, and I have a 2-year degree in business management from Fairfax, Virginia, and then I have a bachelor's degree in education at Aquinas. And through the military, the GI Bill, I was able to go to the 2-year college, and I was able to quit work because I had 5 stepchildren during that marriage, and the more children you had during the Vietnam era, the more money you got on the GI Bill. So it worked in my favor under those, So I went and did my 2-year degree.
Were there very many things that were different because you were a female in the military?
The only thing that we went to boot camp, I was surrounded by women. We were not allowed to skylark, which is, looking at the guys on the other side of the fence, because we were in an enclosed area. And we were ladies. We were not, some of us had been married, and we were 12 weeks with over 300 girls. I was working with women sometimes is not always pleasant. It wasn't bad. And then it was, because I did not stay in a dorm area when I was in college. I was working full-time and going to school part-time. So I never had that dorm where you've got like 4 or 5 girls to a room. Well, we had like 4 or 5 girls to a room, but we only had 3 sides on a room, and across the hallway was another room with 4 or 5 girls, and there was absolutely no privacy. And then later, when I got to my first active duty station, the only comment made was that because I was filling a billet that a man could have had to be on shore, and he could have been home with his family instead of out to sea. Because being in the Navy, the men spend enormous amount of time out to sea. It's like, I'm sorry, I have no control over that, because women were not allowed on ships. Not till the end of my active duty were women first starting to go out to sea on the what we call the comfort ships.
Just forgot what I was going to ask.
Okay.
Oh, did you get any chance to socialize with the men you were working with?
Oh, yeah. It's just like working in an office. I mean, if we were working in the office and Friday night, I call date night, because my husband and I always try to go out together on Friday nights. But a lot of the men had families. Later in the reserves, I was in the same reserve unit with the same guys for almost, 15 of 17 years. I watched them have their children, raise their families. Their children were growing up and all of a sudden getting ready to graduate. And so, yeah, we bonded. There's a lot of camaraderie of, going in. A lot of times I don't see the wives at the airport as they were dropping their husbands off and saying goodbye to them, and as we came in, or if we had functions a couple of times a year, we'd get together, and I just hope that I didn't pose any threat to any wife, because they were like brothers to me. I mean, we were a tight-knit group. We went around the world to different reserve stations, or to different communication stations in the reserves, and seen a lot. And they went off and did their thing, I went off and did our thing, and then we came back and compared notes of what we had seen and what we had done, and had a good time. We worked our 40 hours or 36 hours, or had our weekends off, so we'd go off on the weekends. When we were out in California, we'd drive up to Reno or Las Vegas, or whichever one was closest to us. And when we went overseas, we got to see a lot more.
What kind of things did you do after you were done with your 3 years of active duty?
When I got out of the Navy after my 3 years, because I had gotten married, I had 5 stepchildren, and women were not allowed to have dependents. My girlfriend was, we met in boot camp and gone to Radium and A school, and were good friends for another 15 years till I lost contact with her, but women could not have dependents. I had gotten married, I had 5 stepchildren, and I had to get out. She stayed in, got married, and had a baby. She requested to stay in, and her husband got orders out to California. She went out there for a little while, had the baby, and when the baby was just still a toddler, she had to take orders and go to Greenland for a year. She came back. 9 months later, she had her second baby, and she said, that's it, no, and she got out of the Navy. She later went into the reserves. But that was a choice that she made, requesting to stay in. But she was separated from a brand new baby and her husband for a year. And then later, they both went to Italy, and they were stationed in Italy for 3 years. She had to sacrifice the 12 months while her baby was with her husband, and then she was able to join him. Because I had 5 stepchildren, I had no choice. I had orders to go to Guam in 1974. We were the first shipment of women to go there, but because I was married and had 5 stepchildren, I had to get out. I had no choice. So they got me out within the end of the 3 years. They rushed through all the paperwork because they knew that if they had kept me in, they would have had to prorate the enlistment bonus. And that was even more paperwork. So they got me out. And then back in the government service as a clerk in the same office. So I worked with the same people that I worked with when I was in the Navy, which was kind of special because I knew what I was doing. And then later on, I worked that office under Naval Investigative Service was involved with the Privacy Act that came out in the early 70s, the Freedom of Information Act. So we were very big on getting involved with that.
While you were in the reserves, what was life like? Was it different from when you were in your active service?
The reserves was a great way to go. I had thought seriously about going back in, but I was working in computers at that time, making good money, and I had 1 weekend a month that I had to go to the reserves, and then a 2-week mini vacation, and we planned that vacation, that 2-week reserve active duty that we had to do, like January, February, and March time frame. So we got out of the weather here in Michigan, and we went to the East Coast, the West Coast. We ended up over in Diego Garcia, a little tiny dot of an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And we were there. Our unit was attached to that island. So if the balloon had gone up, we would have gone there while the active duty had gone to where the action was. That's what our reserve unit was to do. And we went to Diego Garcia 2 years, 2 different times in 2 years. The first time we went the West Coast, where we flew to San Francisco, then to Japan, flew over Vietnam, and landed in the Philippines at Clark Air Base, and was there for, our plane had to, we were there for a day and a half, and then from the Philippines, then we flew to Diego Garcia, and it was a 36-hour flight. It was a long time in the air. And then 4 years later, Clark Air Base was no longer in existence, and we went the East Coast, and we left from Pennsylvania. We were in Athens, Greece, Naples, Italy, Bahrain, and then we flew to Diego Garcia. But when we were in Bahrain, to replenish the plane, we had to get off, but because we were all Americans or British, they put us on a bus, drove us out to the middle of the runway, and we had to sit out there for 4 hours while they took care of the plane. And it was like a scary thing because all the graffiti on the bus was all in Arabic, and our driver had a turban, and we had no idea what was happening. All we knew was that we had to go out there and sit in the middle of the runway until they were done with the plane, because they didn't want the natives to know that they were Americans or British on their soil. So, and that was during the United States was escorting the oil tankers during that time. So that was afterwards when we found out, it's like, holy cow, that was exciting, scary. I didn't feel I was in any danger, but it was different.
So, do you think that while you were on your job, did you think that you had a really important job?
I did, especially when we went to the reserves. There's always a joke that the reserves were there to play. Well, we worked our 12 hours a day if we went on to the shift, and we worked with equipment that maybe we hadn't worked with before. And the first time I worked in Fleet Alley, that was really intimidating for me. We were sending out voice messages to the ships, and they all knew that my turn was next, and I had to call out to the ships and notify them that we were sending them traffic. And I was just stuttering so bad, and I couldn't talk, and they were all giggling behind me because they knew that I was the term now would be a newbie, but that term wasn't around back then. Later, I was okay with it. But the first time you talk and broadcast out, it's like being a radio announcer. You're talking to, how many people are you talking to at one time? How many people are listening to you? And you're stuttering and trying to get out important information. And that was scary. But now I've got the knowledge, because if the balloon drops now, the first thing that's going to go are satellites. And there are not a lot of people who still know how to operate the big receivers and transmitters, with the exception of the ham operators that are still active today. The ham operators still are a very important part of our culture.
What kind of things did you do for fun during your job? Did you ever goof around and maybe misbehave a little bit?
Heaven forbid. I was sweet and innocent. Yeah, there was, in boot camp, we were a bunch of women all together in, one big area. And one of the girls was a beautician, and she had some wigs with her. And another girl, for some reason, she had a rubber blow-up doll. And we blew that doll up, and I was part of the party that got in trouble. There was about 6 of us that did it. And we put that blow-up doll and her wig in a bunk. And we got caught, and we lost the smoking privileges. The smoking light was out for a week for us. And back in the 70s, I smoked. And I couldn't smoke for a week because our rubber dolly got caught. So it was harmless fun, but and the company commander laughed about it later. She couldn't laugh in front of us, but that was a very harmless prank. But we were there in boot camp over New Year's Eve, and the only alcohol we had was mouthwash, and all we could say was that we got a little buzz. Well, yuck, mouthwash now. But yeah, you joked around. It's just like being in a regular office. You've got your buds that you work with and joke around with, and hey, how you doing? How's your kids? How's your wife? That type of thing. So to me, it was like working in a regular office. I mean, now, later in the reserves, as I got older than the young kids in the Navy, it's like, was I ever that young? Was I ever that crazy? And it's like, yeah, I probably was, but I'd grown up and matured some, because I retired from the reserves with a total of 20 years in 1998. That was the same time that I graduated from Aquinas. So I did a double-decker and made a major accomplishment in my life.
Were the people who were in charge of you, were they mean? Were they the stereotypical officer who's always grumpy and always yells at everybody?
The first couple of weeks of boot camp, yeah, that's what I thought. You will become a lady. You will become a square corner. And that was her motto. And I was such a little country girl, I was terribly intimidated. Now it's like, excuse me. It wouldn't faze me at all now. I've raised children and had a couple of husbands, and nothing fazes me now.
If you were ever bored while working, did you ever use the radios to contact anyone other than who you were supposed to?
No. They were always set up to the frequencies. And right now, the TVs are all on a certain frequency with the with the analog signal. There's certain frequencies that the Navy would use, and you couldn't contact other people unless they had the same equipment. I mean, I know my girlfriend, when she was in Greenland, she was able to keep in contact with her husband and her baby, but they were both on military bases and both had the same equipment where she could do that. But I couldn't contact civilians. I just used the phone and called home when I got home sick.
Did you ever use your military experiences and things you did as your military job? Did you ever use those in your civilian jobs?
Not really. I mean, a lot of the clerical stuff that I did, um,
Did you use any of your job experiences from the military in your civilian life?
not really. Most of my job was clerical, logging and stuff, um, keeping track of messages coming in, going out, sending out messages, typing. Typing probably, of course, the typewriters that they had, that they used in the military, number one, were of World War II vintage. And number two, you had to use special keys for letters and numbers. So you could not type like you could on a typewriter. Now, that typing skill there followed me on to my civilian career because I do a lot of typing, but everything's on the computer. And if you make a mistake, you just hit that little backspace and continue on.
What kind of things did you do in your civilian life?
My civilian life, I through the Vietnam GI Bill, I went to a computer learning center. I was a programmer. I worked for a company in Virginia, and my company transferred me out to California, and I did programming for military type programs. When I moved back home to Michigan, my company lost the contract, and so I had a choice to take a job in Hawaii or move back home. And I had been to Hawaii on my 30th birthday, and I said, that's a nice place to be, but I don't want to live there. So I moved back home, but I was overqualified for all the programming jobs in this area. And I did get a job for a couple of years, but I sat in front of a computer screen. I needed people contact. That was the one thing that I have a lot more of in my job. I work for the public. I work with realtors. I work with mortgage companies. I work with buyers and sellers buying their first home or selling their home that they've lived in their whole life, and now they're going to maybe a condo or a retirement community, and you see the highs and lows of people selling their homes or buying their first home because they're about to start a family. So that part there with my job that I have right now, with the people contact, is what I love the most. And because I was able to be around the world and see different cultures, when our trip to Diego Garcia, we stopped in the Philippines, and we were there for a day and a half the first time, and when we left, we were there for 3 days. So I got to see a lot. And we took a drive down what they call the Bataan Death Road, Death March. This is a time during World War II. But the thing that stuck in my mind were all these little huts. They had the clothes out on the line and being held with bamboo clothespins. But they all had the TV antennas out of the roof. And it's like, wow, they've got to have their TV. Their clothes are nice out on the line, but they're living in little huts, bamboo huts or with thatched roofs. And then later I've, been in, seeing a whole lot more, and it's like, yeah, I'm very lucky to be an American. When we were in the Philippines, when they told us, that we were going out and stuff, we had to be careful. What they had was like run-a-fuzz that were in front of the different places downtown in Manila. They carried machine guns, so you didn't mess with them. You stayed away from them. And I went down there with, I never went to that, though we went in groups, never alone, always in big groups, 4, 5, 6 at a time. And we stayed together, and we seen the sights. But it was, that was when Imelda Marcos was there with all of her shoes. And that was a big joke because I wore high heels, and I had 90 pair of high heels. And they always called me Esmeralda Marcos because she was well, the First Lady of the Philippines, her husband. And that was, the Philippines was very eye-opening. And of course, 30 or 40 years before, our soldiers were fighting there. And it's like very, I don't know how to describe it. But if you stop and think about stuff like that, that you were walking where men had lost their lives 40 years before, you're going to take things a little bit more seriously.
So, you say you've traveled a whole lot, you've seen the world, but did that require you actually packing up and moving? Did you ever live in very many places?
No, basically, I was living in Virginia when I was in the military. Got out, stayed in Virginia, and then I worked for a civilian company, and they shipped me out to California. And then I was out to California for 9 months, and then the company lost a contract, and I moved back home. But I've traveled for vacations in a lot of different places. And with the two different trips to the Diego Garcia, one, we went around the world this way, went around the world this way, so I can say that yes, I have been around the world. And I mean, we stopped in Naples, we stopped in Athens, and Bahrain, which I had mentioned earlier. So that, of course, I've been to Ireland and I've kissed the Blarney Stone, but that was on my own time.
So, when you were traveling, was it ever hard for your family or for you being apart from your family so often?
When I was on active duty, I was single, and I was stationed in Virginia. Later, when I joined the reserves, a couple of times when I was out in California, my husband at that time went with me. We stayed on the beach, which is, we didn't stay in the barracks. We stayed at a hotel, which they consider what they call on the beach. So we'd go off and do our sightseeing when I wasn't working. He'd watch TV or take us crossword puzzles or a book and read while I was working. And then when I got out of work, we'd go out to dinner and do our sightseeing. But it was only for 2 weeks. Almost 3 weeks, the time that we were in the Philippines, in the Diego Garcia, because that was such a long flight. But it was a mini vacation. I mean, I still had to work my 40 hours, but I could go home to the barracks and relax. And I always took a crochet hook with me, and I crocheted while I was working. Whenever I travel, I either have a book or a crochet hook, and I'd get to where I'd go on for the 2 weeks, and I'd crochet up an Afghan while I was there, and I'd leave it for somebody. I probably got Afghans pretty much around the world, because I'd make them up, and if you have to come home, you don't have to do housework or do dishes. You got a lot of time on your hands. But so I mean, because most of the time we went away on our 2 weeks, we stayed in the barracks, and then weekends we'd go off and do our sightseeing when we weren't working. And I just idle hands. Gotta keep busy.
So, how did your military career come to an end? Was it something that happened real quick that just had to make you stop, or was it something that kind of just dwindled down and you decided to resign?
I had the 3 years, and I got out because I was married and I had 5 stepchildren. Women could not have dependents. Then after, I think 7 years later, I went back into the reserve program, and I stayed in the reserves for another 17 years, so I had a total of 20. Once I got my 20 in, it's like, okay, no more getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning once a month. Darn, no more mini vacations, no more seeing the world. I miss that part. I miss the guys that I did the reserves with. So that part I miss. Because there's, you watch these young kids grow up, have their families, and you see them every month. one weekend a month you'd see them. And 2 weeks of the year we'd go and meet, and go off and see the world, do our job, and come back. Then we come back to real life and go back to work again. So there's nothing wrong with hard work.
Throughout your military career, what was your fondest memory that you can always think of?
Ooh, fondest. You didn't ask me that the other night. I don't know. I guess the experiences that I had in boot camp. I met some wonderful women. And my one girlfriend, we stayed in contact, and I lost touch with her in the late 80s. I know that she was in Beaumont, Texas, with her and her husband, and she was in the reserves. They had both gone into the reserves, and their daughters are probably producing grandchildren for them now, and I can't find her. So the other day after your call, I got on the computer and looked up Bainbridge, Maryland, where I went to boot camp, and this is a picture that I had taken off the site, showing that through these portals passed the women of the greatest navy of the world, and that's where we had our company picture. And I don't know if there's sites there that I can find and try and locate her. If she starts looking at the military, hopefully we'll get in contact through Bainbridge. But one of the things that this was my patch that I found last night looking around, was on my uniform when I was in boot camp, propellers and the anchor. And this was also a hat device that we had on our hats. And I lost mine when I went out to Whidbey Island in Washington State. I had it on my my jacket, and it came off. This was my, when I went to Radyman School, I was a seaman second class, and these uniforms were the seersucker that you had to starch and starch and starch. They buttoned down the front, short sleeves, little A-line skirt, and they could not be above our knees. I was in the 70s. My girlfriend and I, we went to the Navy Ball when we were in Radyman School together. And in the 70s, hot pants were very, very popular. And I had made a lace hot pant suit, and she had a hot pant suit with lace, and we wore white go-go boots. We walked into the auditorium, and there were generals and admirals and gold scrambled eggs everywhere, because the men wore the dress uniforms, all gold and glitter, and the women were in long formals, and Jeannie and I came in there with hot pants. Nobody said a word because we were dressed up. I mean, we had our hair done, and we were all in lace, but they were just short lace. And then later, when I went to Radyman School, then this was my patch that I had on my uniform with the sparks for the Radyman. That was when I was E4. And when I left the Navy, I had made, this is a plaque from the Naval Investigative Service under Naval Intelligence Command. And this was signed by Captain Martin. And this shows that I was Radyman second class at that time. And then later, when I was in the reserves, I made Radyman first class, which was an E6. And I did pass the test for E7, but I did not make the board, and to make E7, you also had to extend for 2 years, and I almost had my 20 years in. It's enough. I've got my 20 in. I'm done. So I retired as an E6.
What kind of things did you do? What was your life like after you were out of the military?
When I retired, or when I went back into the reserves?
When you retired.
When I retired, now I'm just waiting now till I turn 60 and start receiving my retirement. I work in my regular job during the daytime, and I have a part-time job at Myers. But eventually, when I hit 60, then I'll start drawing my retirement pay. And it won't be a lot. The whole time I was in this, the 17 years I was in, I was able to I used that money for an extra car payment. So I always had a nice car, which was a perk of being in the reserves. We got 4 days pay for one weekend, and that was pretty cool. So I got paid twice as much as, and that's the way the reserve system works. So that was nice that it was set up that way. And then when we went away for our 2 weeks, if we were overseas, we got overseas pay for 2 weeks. So that was a little extra.
Did you miss your job after you retired?
Not the job so much, because that's a clerical type position, but I missed the people. Every once in a while, if I'm in Grand Rapids and it's on the third weekend of the month, I might run into the Reserve Center to see who's still there. I know that Bill is in Montcalm Sheriff, and he made chief, and he stayed an extra couple of years, but it's been since '98, so I don't think he's there anymore. So he's probably retired up in Montcalm County. And some of the other people were from Allegan and different parts around West Michigan, and I don't get a chance to run into them. And I kind of miss seeing what they're doing, how their kids are, but I guess I just haven't taken the time to check it out, because it could be done. I'm just too busy with other things, I guess.
So you still wish you could stay in contact with the people you've worked with?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, I mean, just to say hi or how you doing, and let's get together for a barbecue this summer or something like that. See what you've done since you've gotten out of the Navy, because we were all pretty close to the same age. A couple of them were a couple years younger, but we pretty much went through that 17 years or 15 years here in Grand Rapids together.
What's the biggest thing that you noticed that has changed about you since you were in the military?
I've grown up. I was a scared little country girl when I wouldn't even ride in a taxi. To this day, I still don't ride in taxis. But I was very intimidated when I was younger. I went to a little one-room schoolhouse for a couple of years, and then I worked in a factory, and I finally joined the Navy, seen the world. It's like, wow. There's a lot out there. There's a lot of opportunities out there. There's still things on my honey-do list of things that I want to do in life that I haven't done yet. And I just hope that I'm still able to do them. I mean, I want to learn how to play guitar one of these days. But I don't want to cut my nails because I work with the public. I need to keep my nails artificially done. Shame on me, but those little things like that. I want to go to northern France and meet my pen pal from high school. We're both in our 50s now. I don't know if she's still living there. But that's one of my things that I still want to do in life while I'm still young enough to do it. There are 3 states that I've not been in, either between the military with my travels, or when I left California, I drove out there with my furniture when I went to California, then drove back and came back a different way. But there are 3 states I've never been in. Hopefully, in the next 2 years, we've got plans to go and visit North and South Dakota. And we're going to spend 2 weeks just driving all over the state, seeing things that I've never seen before. Alaska, I don't know if I'll ever get to Alaska, but maybe. But that's one of my goals. I'm looking forward to retirement, and we're going to travel back and forth across the United States. If we can afford gas, that's an issue that was not planned on.
Are you proud and happy that you were in the military, and are be proud of what you've done.
Absolutely. That's the best thing I can recommend to someone who does not know what they want to do in life is to join the military, get some work experience, get a knowledge of away from a small town atmosphere. I worked when I went to boot camp. There were girls from Hawaii. There were girls from all over the United States. We were all together, living together for 14 weeks. We learned about different things that they did, we did, and it gave us a direction in life. Even though we not necessarily stayed on the same direction, but it opened our eyes so we travel in many directions and many opportunities. There's many opportunities out there. But I would like to do some more things in life. I don't know yet what I want to do when I grow up. I've worked in the computer field and clerical I started working when I was 14 at A&W. So I've been working way too long. I'm not going to add that up for you. But when I joined the military, I knew that I wasn't going to come home and just work in the factory like my parents did. I wanted something more. And I think that chance to join the military for any young person out of high school, unless they have a goal, a direction that they want to take, the military will give them opportunities to choose and make decisions as to what they want to do later in life. And you can always change it. People change their careers all the time, but it gives you, it opens your eyes, opens your minds to greater opportunities, things that could happen to you. And of course, the discipline. I mean, discipline was tough for me, but I managed, and so did all the other girls. And there are things you have to do. And the work ethic that I grew up with, the animals were out in the barn, they couldn't feed themselves. We had to go out and feed them for them. We had to put the grain out there, we had to put the hay down. So we grew up knowing that if there's work to be done, it had to be done. And you go out there and do it. But the military teaches you, number one, discipline, and it gives you a push towards a good work ethic because you've got your job to do and you've got to get it done. Mission complete. You don't stop. You don't go home at 4 o'clock just because it says to clock out. You stay till your work is done. And that was one of the things that, with my background and my work ethic, I had no problem with that. If there's work to be done, you stay there until you get it done. Because if we've got a message coming in that says there's an emergency, that's got to be taken care of. You can't just, oh, I'm sorry, it's 4 o'clock, I got to go. You don't do that in the military. No way. Not on my watch.
The following oral military history project is a series of documentaries in association with the Lowell area men and women who proudly served and sacrificed part of their lives to preserve the opportunities for all of us to build our businesses and raise our families under a blanket of freedom. For reservations and more information, contact the Lowell Area Historical Museum at 616-897-7688.